My fiancée said, cheating's just life. You'll learn. I said, thanks. At dinner with her parents, I announced the engagement to someone else. I never thought I'd hear those words spoken so casually by the woman I was planning to marry. The night was nothing special at first, just a Thursday evening. The city humming outside our apartment, the faint glow of her phone screen lighting up her face as she lounged on the couch. I had walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water, and I wasn't even trying to eavesdrop. But her voice carried, low and relaxed, like she was just talking about the weather. Cheating's just life. You'll learn. It was said with such certainty, like a rule of nature, something as ordinary as rain falling. She was on the phone, laughing quietly with whoever was on the other end. My fiancée, Mira, wasn't crying, wasn't apologizing, wasn't whispering in shame. She said it boldly, like it was advice she'd give to a friend who just got married. At first, I froze. I didn't want to move, didn't want her to know I was there. My mind spun, trying to convince myself I'd misheard. But then she followed it with a laugh, a soft exhale, and the clink of her wine glass on the table. He's so naive. He thinks loyalty is everything. I guess I'll let him believe it until we're married. I gripped the edge of the counter so hard my hand hurt. The water in my glass trembled as if it were reacting to me. This wasn't suspicion. This wasn't paranoia. It wasn't vague text messages, odd hours, or unexplained outings. This was my fiancée stating, without hesitation, that she didn't believe in fidelity, and worse, that I was her fool. I wanted to march into the living room, demand answers, shout, maybe even throw her phone out the window. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she spoke, so certain, so smug. Maybe it was the realization that if I erupted, she'd simply lie, twist things, or laugh it off. Mira was clever. She'd been raised knowing how to manipulate a room, and I knew instinctively that an emotional confrontation would only make me look weak. So I swallowed the anger and retreated quietly down the hall. My pulse was pounding, but my thoughts were sharpening. That was the moment something shifted in me. Instead of breaking, I bent inward. I decided to listen, to watch, to learn how deep this really went before making a move. The next few days, I carried myself as though nothing had happened. At breakfast, I asked if she wanted coffee, the way I always did. She said yes, absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone. I studied her face, the same soft expression, the same smile when she leaned over to kiss my cheek. To anyone else, it was the picture of a happy engagement. But every detail now looked staged to me, like a play she was performing. That weekend, I tested her. I told her I had to work late at the office, though in reality, I left early and parked my car 2 blocks away from her workplace. Mira was supposed to be finishing up a project with her design team. Instead, she came out laughing with a man I'd never seen before. Tall, clean-cut, carrying himself with the relaxed ease of someone who knew he was attractive. They didn't touch, but their proximity was intimate, the way people lean in when they share secrets. I took a picture, not because I needed it for proof yet, but because part of me didn't trust my own eyes. I wanted a record, something undeniable. I didn't follow them that time. I wasn't ready. But the seed of suspicion grew into a network of small checks. I studied her credit card statements more closely. Twice, there were charges at a boutique hotel across town. Once, she claimed she'd been at a late client dinner. Another time, she'd told me she was staying with her friend Danielle because they were doing a spa night. I called Danielle a few days later under the guise of asking about an event Mira mentioned. Danielle laughed and said they hadn't hung out in weeks. The evidence was building in layers. Not one massive reveal, but dozens of small cracks lining up into a pattern. Each detail cut deeper, but instead of confronting her, I started writing everything down. Dates, times, receipts, names. It was like building a case file. Maybe it was obsessive, but it gave me control. And every piece made me colder inside, less desperate for answers, more resolved to play this carefully. One evening, I finally confronted her, though not directly about the man. I wanted to see how she'd frame it in her own words. We were sitting on the balcony, the city skyline glowing behind her. She had her wine again, and I just asked her, as calmly as I could, "Do you think fidelity matters in marriage?" She didn't even hesitate. She tilted her head, smirked, and said, "You'll understand one day. People cheat. It's not about if, it's about when. You just have to decide if you're mature enough to handle it." The way she said it was worse than the words themselves. She wasn't confessing. She wasn't warning me. She was teaching me, as if I were a child who hadn't yet figured out the rules of the world. My chest tightened, but I forced a smile. I said, "Thanks for being honest." Nothing more. Her eyes narrowed, like she didn't quite believe how calm I was. But then she shrugged, drained the rest of her glass, and leaned back like the conversation was over. And for her, maybe it was. For me, it was the beginning of something else entirely. After that, my behavior changed. not outwardly. I still played the doting fiancé, still kissed her cheek when she left for work, still texted her good night when she claimed to be at her sister's. But internally, I detached. The part of me that loved her began shutting down. What replaced it was strategy. If she thought I was naive, I'd let her keep thinking that. But I would start pulling strings quietly, in ways she wouldn't notice until it was too late. The first step was to confirm who the man was. It didn't take long. A few casual searches on LinkedIn, and I found him. Thomas Kincaid, a senior consultant at her firm. His profile photo was unmistakable, the same man I'd seen her walking with. He was married, too, according to the little ring icon by his relationship status. That fact alone gave me leverage. If Mira was careless enough to risk this, then Thomas was gambling just as much. I started timing her absences against his schedule. Twice, they matched perfectly. He had late meetings logged on the firm's internal calendar, and those were the nights Mira came home with the faint scent of unfamiliar cologne clinging to her jacket. I kept notes, meticulous. The more I gathered, the more detached I felt, as though I were studying strangers instead of watching my fiancé dismantle our relationship. The strangest part was how normal life looked on the surface. We still had dinner with friends, still discussed wedding venues, still made plans for the future. She would sit across from me, sketching floral arrangements on napkins, talking about bands she wanted for the reception. I nodded, smiled, even agreed to some of her suggestions. All the while, I was planning something very different. Every wedding plan she made was another thread I would pull when the time was right. And in quiet moments, I reflected on her philosophy. Cheating's just life. Did she really believe that? Or was it just an excuse for her own choices? Either way, I knew one thing for certain. If she thought I would quietly accept it, she had chosen the wrong man. By the end of that month, I had compiled a small folder of evidence, photographs, receipts, notes, timelines. I didn't plan to use it yet. Not in anger, not in a fight. The idea was forming in my head like a shadow growing longer each night. If she wanted to play games, then I would learn to play better. And when I finally made my move, it wouldn't be in private, where she could spin lies or twist the story. It would be somewhere she couldn't escape, somewhere her words would echo back at her with no room to hide. That's when the dinner with her parents came up in conversation. Mira brought it up one morning while tying her hair back in the mirror. "We should do something formal," she said. "My parents want you to announce the engagement at dinner next month. They're excited. It'll be a good chance for you to show them you're serious." I watched her reflection as she spoke, her smile flawless, her tone perfectly normal. She had no idea I already knew everything. She had no idea I was planning to use that very dinner for something she would never see coming. I simply said, "Sounds good." Inside, the plan began to crystallize. I had always thought of myself as someone straightforward, maybe even predictable. My friends used to joke that I couldn't lie to save my life. But after overhearing Mira, after watching her walk with Thomas outside her office, something in me changed. Deception became necessary. Every smile I gave her, every nod when she talked about wedding plans, was another step in a game she didn't even realize she was playing. What struck me most was how quickly she seemed to grow bolder. Once she'd laid her philosophy bare, cheating is inevitable, she stopped hiding quite so carefully. She still went through the motions of explaining absences, but they were thinner excuses, as if she barely cared whether I believed her. When she said she was meeting Danielle, she didn't even glance at me to gauge my reaction. When she said she'd be late from work, she didn't add details, just a shrug and a perfunctory kiss on the cheek. It was almost insulting in its laziness. But that arrogance was useful. The more careless she became, the easier it was to gather what I needed. I started with her workplace. She was a senior designer at a firm downtown, and though I wasn't in her field, I knew enough to blend in at the coffee shop across the street. Twice a week, I'd coincidentally stop there around the time her team usually wrapped up. Once, I saw her leave alone. Another time, she left with a group of colleagues. And then, the third time, I saw it. Mira slipping into the passenger seat of Thomas Kincaid's car, a glossy black sedan with tinted windows. He drove off with her like it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't chase them. Instead, I took note of the license plate, the exact time, and the direction they drove. Later that night, while Mira claimed she was working late, I looked up hotel charges again. Right on schedule, there was a payment pending from a boutique hotel off the highway. She had used our joint credit card, probably thinking I'd never notice. The more I pieced together, the less I felt the sting of betrayal. Instead, I felt something colder, sharper, a kind of clarity. Mira wasn't just unfaithful. She was reckless. She believed she was untouchable, that her charm and cleverness would keep me docile. But I was already planning how to dismantle that illusion in a way she'd never recover from. Around this time, I reconnected with someone from my past, Sabrina. We'd gone to university together years back. and though we'd never dated, there had always been an undercurrent between us, the kind of spark you notice but ignore when you're both busy with other people. She reached out on social media one evening, just a casual, "Hey, long time no see" message. Normally, I would have brushed it off, but something in me wanted the distraction. We met for coffee, just to catch up. At least, that's how it started. But talking with her reminded me what genuine interest felt like. She asked about my work, about my family, about my goals. She listened. When I mentioned Mira in passing, I kept my words neutral, but Sabrina picked up on something in my tone. She didn't pry, but she looked at me with this kind of quiet awareness, like she knew I was holding something back. The more we talked, the more I realized Sabrina was someone solid, grounded, the kind of person who didn't play games. And though I wasn't ready to confide in her yet, I knew instinctively that she could become part of the solution, not just as a romantic possibility, but as a witness, someone who could confirm the truth if things went public. Meanwhile, Mira grew more transparent. One night, she sat across from me at dinner, swirling her wine glass lazily, and said, "You know, most marriages aren't what they look like from the outside. People step out. It doesn't mean they don't love their partner. It's just reality." She said it so matter-of-factly, like she was offering me wisdom. I kept my voice steady as I asked, "So what if it happens before marriage?" Her eyes flickered, just for a second, but then she smirked. "Then it's just practice. Don't be so uptight, Calvin. You'll drive yourself crazy trying to control things." I nodded slowly, like I was considering her point. Inside, though, I was burning with a mix of disgust and fascination. She wasn't even denying it anymore. She was daring me to call her out. And because I didn't, because I acted like I was fine, she seemed to relax further, convinced I was weak, or worse, complicit. That night, when she fell asleep, I checked her phone. I hadn't done it before, because I hated the idea of snooping. But this time, I needed to know just how deep it went. The messages were damning. Not just with Thomas, but with two other men. Flirtations, innuendos, late-night exchanges. Nothing as serious as with Thomas, but enough to prove this wasn't an isolated lapse. This was who she was. I didn't confront her. I took screenshots, saved them to a hidden folder, and put her phone back on the nightstand. As she slept beside me, breathing evenly, I stared at the ceiling and realized there was no going back. The next step was subtle. I started gathering allies. Not openly, not by telling people outright what Mira was doing, but by asking questions, planting seeds. At her firm's holiday mixer, I struck up a conversation with Jonah, one of her colleagues. We'd met briefly before, but that night I bought him a drink, loosened him up, and steered the conversation toward office gossip. He leaned in, voice dropping, and said, "Man, you've got patience. Everybody knows Myra's. Let's just say, she's not exactly traditional. Thomas isn't the first guy she's gotten close with." I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Really?" Jonah nodded, clearly enjoying the drama. "People talk. I'm not saying anything specific, but don't be shocked if you hear things." That was all I needed. Confirmation, not just from my own investigations, but from someone in her circle. Myra's reputation was already fraying behind her back. At this point, she started pushing for the dinner with her parents. It wasn't just a suggestion anymore. She framed it as an expectation. "They want something formal," she said. "It's time you showed them how serious you are. Announce the engagement properly. Make it official." I smiled, as if honored by the prospect. But inside, I was already mapping out how to use it. The dinner would be the perfect stage. Her parents admired me, saw me as steady and reliable, the kind of son-in-law who could balance out their daughter's impulsive streak. They had no idea who Mira really was, and I knew exposing her in front of them would cut deeper than any private confrontation. Still, I needed one more layer. Something that would make the reveal undeniable. That's when I thought of Sabrina again. We'd met for coffee twice more by then, and the connection was growing. She made me laugh, something I hadn't done freely in weeks. She made me forget, even briefly, the weight of Myra's betrayal. So one evening, I tested the waters. I told her, vaguely, that things with Mira weren't what they seemed, that I was reevaluating. Sabrina didn't push. She just nodded and said, "You deserve honesty, at the very least." Her words stuck with me. Honesty. It felt like a foreign language compared to what I lived with Mira. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized Sabrina wasn't just a friend from the past. She represented the opposite of everything Mira stood for. The mind-blowing moment came a week later. Mira, emboldened by my apparent passivity, suggested something that made my skin crawl. We were sitting in bed, her scrolling on her phone, me pretending to read. Out of nowhere, she said, "You know, maybe we should have an understanding. Once we're married, if either of us slips, we don't make it a big deal. It's healthier that way." She said it so casually, like she was offering to split chores differently. I looked up, pretending to think it over. So you mean, we just ignore it if one of us cheats? She shrugged. Not ignore. Just accept it. Relationships aren't about rules, Calvin. They're about flexibility. I forced a smile. That makes sense. Thanks for explaining. Her grin widened, like she'd won some kind of victory. She actually believed she'd convinced me. But in that moment, I knew exactly what I would do. She wanted me pliant, complicit, a partner in her delusion. Instead, I would be her undoing. The days leading up to the dinner felt like living in two realities. In one, Mira and I played the role of the happy couple, discussing flowers, venues, honeymoon ideas. In the other, I was quietly assembling a case file, saving every receipt, every message, every photograph. I also began spending more time with Sabrina, though not in a way that could be accused of impropriety. We went for walks, grabbed coffee, talked about books and work. Nothing physical, nothing that Mira could twist against me. But the bond was there, growing steadily. I didn't tell Sabrina everything yet, but I hinted enough that she knew Mira wasn't who she seemed. And then, with a calmness that surprised even me, I invited Sabrina to the dinner. Not as a date, at least not on the surface, but as a friend from the past, who I wanted Myra's family to meet. She agreed, though I could tell she suspected more was going on. Mira, oblivious, was thrilled. She spent days planning her outfit, rehearsing what she'd say when her parents toasted our future. She had no idea that I was preparing to flip the script entirely. By the end of part 2, the stage was set. I had evidence, allies, and a plan. Mira believed she'd train me into accepting her worldview, that I would walk into her parents' dining room and play the role she wanted. But I knew better. The dinner wasn't going to be her triumph. It was going to be the beginning of her unraveling. And as I lay in bed that night, listening to her breathing softly beside me, I almost laughed at the irony. She thought she was teaching me that cheating was just life. What she didn't know was that I had already learned something else. Betrayal isn't the end of the story. Sometimes, it's just the setup for the perfect reversal. The strange thing about betrayal is that once you've seen it clearly, once you've recognized it for what it is, the person committing it doesn't look the same anymore. Mira still moved around the apartment like she owned it, still smiled when she brushed past me in the hallway, still called me babe when she wanted me to carry her groceries. But to me, she looked like an actress who didn't realize the play was over. Every word out of her mouth felt like a script, rehearsed and hollow. And I played my part perfectly. If anything, I became more affectionate in small ways. I texted her at lunch, asked about her day, even surprised her with takeout once or twice. She ate it up, convinced my calmness was proof that I'd absorbed her philosophy. To her, my passivity was consent. That was the shield I needed, because someone like Mira never suspects betrayal from the person she thinks she has under control. My evenings were consumed with evidence. While Mira was out with friends, I sat at my desk cataloging everything. Screenshots of her messages with Thomas, receipts from hotels, bank transactions, even notes on her behavior when she came home. I organized it like a case file, dates, times, cross-referenced with her excuses. It wasn't just for my satisfaction. It was insurance. Mira was clever enough to twist stories, to gaslight if cornered. I knew if I confronted her privately, she'd spin it back on me, maybe even claim I was paranoid or controlling. But with hard proof, shown at the right time, she'd have nowhere to run. The strongest piece came 2 weeks before the dinner. Thomas charged a weekend getaway to a cabin rental, split with Mira on her credit card. She had told me she was visiting her mother out of town. When she came back Sunday night, she hugged me at the door, smelling faintly of bonfire smoke, and complained about family stress. I smiled, kissed her forehead, and thought, perfect. The receipt was already saved. Around this time, my connection with Sabrina deepened. At first, she was just a reminder that not all women spoke in riddles or treated loyalty like a joke. But the more time I spent with her, the more I realized she was someone I could trust. We didn't rush anything. It wasn't about rebound or revenge. It was about clarity. Talking with her felt like fresh air after months of breathing smoke. One evening, sitting in her apartment, I finally told her everything. Not in vague hints, but the full truth. Myra's words, the evidence, the plan for the dinner. I expected shock or hesitation. Instead, Sabrina listened quietly, her brow furrowed, and when I finished, she asked what my endgame was. I told her, to expose Mira in front of the people she respected most, to make sure her double life collapsed in a way she couldn't salvage. Sabrina didn't flinch. She nodded slowly and said, if that's what you need to do, then do it. But make sure you walk away clean. No shouting matches, no drama she can twist back at you. Just facts. Her words stayed with me. Facts. Cold and undeniable. That would be my weapon. The closer the dinner came, the more reckless Mira grew. One night, she came home tipsy and laughed as she kicked off her heels. You'll thank me one day, she slurred. Better to accept reality now than be shocked later. I carried her to bed, tucked her in, and sat awake thinking about the irony. She thought she was schooling me in reality, when in truth, she was writing her own downfall. A week before the dinner, I received an anonymous email. The subject line read, "You should know." Attached were 3 blurry photos of Mira and Thomas entering a hotel together. No message, no signature. My first thought was that it came from Jonah. Maybe gossip at her firm had spilled over, and someone wanted me to see what everyone already whispered about. For a moment, I considered confronting her early. But then I realized, why ruin the stage I'd prepared? I tucked the photos into my folder with everything else. If anything, it was proof that her double life wasn't as hidden as she believed. People were already talking. In the days leading up to the dinner, Mira was radiant. She bought a new dress, booked a salon appointment, even practiced smiling in the mirror. She kept saying, "This is going to be perfect. My parents will be so proud." I agreed every time, hiding the edge in my voice. If she noticed, she didn't say anything. Meanwhile, I prepared Sabrina. She wasn't going as my girlfriend. That would have been too obvious, too soon. She was going as an old friend, someone I wanted Myra's family to meet. But Sabrina understood her role. She would be calm, polite, supportive, and, most importantly, present when the reveal came. Her presence alone would force Myra's parents to question everything. The night before the dinner, Mira dropped her final bombshell. We were sitting on the couch, her head on my shoulder, when she said, "You know, maybe I'll introduce Thomas to you one day. He and I have such a good, working relationship. I think you'd get along." She said it with a mischievous smile, like she was daring me to react. I looked at her, held her gaze, and said, "I'd like that." Her smile faltered just slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to accept. But she recovered quickly, laughing it off. "See? You're learning." The morning of the dinner, I laid out everything one last time. The folder, neatly organized. The screenshots on a backup drive. The printed receipts. Even the anonymous photos. I didn't know how Mira would react, but I knew she wouldn't be able to dismiss all of it. Sabrina texted me, "Still on for tonight?" I replied, "Yes. Thank you." When Mira came out of the bedroom, dressed to perfection, she looked at me like I was the prize she had tamed. She kissed me, perfumed strong and sweet, and whispered, "Tonight's going to be unforgettable." She was right. We drove to her parents' house together, the city lights fading into the quiet suburbs. Mira hummed softly, one hand resting on my knee. To anyone watching, we were the picture of a happy couple on our way to celebrate. But in my head, I replayed Sabrina's advice: stay calm, stay factual, walk away clean. When we pulled into the driveway, Mira squeezed my hand and said, "This is it. Just smile and say the right words." I smiled back. "Don't worry. I will." Inside, her parents greeted us warmly. Her mother hugged me. Her father clapped me on the back. The table was set beautifully, candles flickering, wine already poured. Sabrina arrived shortly after, and Mira barely registered her presence, just a polite nod, assuming she was irrelevant. That arrogance would be her undoing. As we sat down to dinner, Mira leaned close and whispered, "This is your moment. Don't mess it up." I almost laughed, because she had no idea. By the end of that evening, the person who thought she controlled the game was about to discover what it felt like to be exposed with nowhere to hide. And as I watched her toast her parents with that smug, flawless smile, I tightened my grip on the ring box in my pocket. Not for her, but for someone else. The stage was set. The trap was closed. Dinner at Myra's parents' house had always been a polished affair. Her mother was the type who believed a well-set table could fix anything, and her father wore the easy smile of a man who thought his family's reputation mattered more than truth. That night, everything sparkled, silverware polished, candles lit, food steaming from porcelain dishes. They greeted us with warmth, her mother hugging me tight, her father clapping me on the back. To them, I was already family. Mira basked in it, eyes shining, her hand squeezing mine like she was directing a play and I was her lead actor. She looked radiant in her new dress, her smile practiced to perfection. To her, this was the night I would cement my loyalty, announce our engagement in front of the people who mattered most, and lock myself into the role she had designed for me. She leaned in and whispered, "Don't mess this up." I nodded, hiding the laugh that threatened to escape. Sabrina arrived a few minutes later. She looked composed, her presence elegant but not overstated. I had told her exactly how to carry herself, and she did so flawlessly, polite, warm, but quiet. Mira barely registered her, assuming she was just some forgotten acquaintance I dragged along out of politeness. It didn't occur to her for a second that Sabrina's presence was deliberate. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Myra's parents asked about work, about plans, about when we might start thinking of children. Mira handled most of the talking, painting us as a perfect couple. I kept my answers short, polite, giving nothing away. The tension inside me wasn't nervousness anymore. It was focus. I could feel the ring box in my pocket, the folder of evidence tucked carefully into my bag by my chair. The time was approaching. Her father raised his glass midway through the meal, his voice booming. To Calvin and Mira. A bright future ahead. Everyone raised their glasses. Mira beamed. This was her cue. She nudged me, her eyes urging me to stand. And so I did. I set my glass down, pulled the ring box from my pocket, and looked at Mira. She straightened, ready to receive what she thought was her moment. Everyone's eyes turned toward me. I held the box in my hand, paused just long enough for the anticipation to build, and then I turned, away from Mira, towards Sabrina. I'm announcing my engagement, I said calmly. To Sabrina. The silence was instant and crushing. Myra's mother dropped her fork. Her father's smile froze, confusion flooding his face. Sabrina blinked once, but held her composure, exactly as we'd agreed. Mira, though, went pale. What are you doing? She hissed. I didn't sit down. I opened the box, the ring catching the light, and slid it towards Sabrina. She didn't reach for it, just let it rest there as evidence of the truth. My voice stayed steady. You wanted me to announce my engagement tonight. I am. Her parents gaped at me, then at their daughter. What is this supposed to mean? Her father demanded. It means, I said, pulling the folder from my bag, that Mira isn't who you think she is. I laid the folder on the table, sliding it open to reveal receipts, screenshots, photographs. She believes cheating is just part of life. She's been with her colleague Thomas, and not just him. I let her explain it to me herself. She said fidelity doesn't matter. She said once we were married, I'd learn. Well, this is me learning. Mira lunged across the table, trying to grab the papers, but I pulled them back. Her mother gasped as she caught sight of one of the photos. Mira, it's not what it looks like. Myra's voice cracked, desperation breaking through her usual confidence. He's twisting things, he's making me look. Like what? I asked. My voice was calm, but inside I could feel the cold satisfaction settle in. A liar? A cheater? Everything here came from you, Mira. Your own receipts. Your own words. Your own arrogance. Her father snatched one of the receipts from the folder, his face reddening as he read. A cabin rental? You told us you were visiting your mother. Myra's composure shattered. She stammered, her eyes darting between me, her parents, and Sabrina. You can't do this here. Not in front of them. This is exactly where it belongs, I said. You wanted me to play along, to smile, to stand beside you and pretend. But I'm not your student. I don't accept your version of reality. Her mother pushed back from the table, her voice sharp with disgust. How could you embarrass us like this? For the first time since I'd known Mira, she looked small. Her shoulders hunched, her voice pleading. Mom, Dad, please. But her father wasn't listening. He looked at me, his face grim. Thank you for telling us. I don't know what to say. I closed the folder, slid the ring box fully towards Sabrina, and said, There's nothing more to say. I won't marry her. Then I sat down, calm and composed, while Mira trembled beside me. The dinner limped on for a few more minutes, but the atmosphere was destroyed. Her mother excused herself, muttering about shame. Her father asked me quietly to leave the evidence with him. Mira alternated between glaring at me with venom and begging me with wide, tearful eyes. But the more she tried, the more obvious it became to everyone that the mask had fallen off. When Sabrina and I finally stood to go, Mira followed me to the door, her voice low and frantic. You can't do this. You're ruining my life. Think about what you're throwing away. I looked at her one last time and said, No, you threw it away. Then I walked out. The aftermath was swift. Myra's parents distanced themselves immediately, ashamed of her. Word spread at her firm. Someone, maybe Jonah, maybe someone else, leaked the same photos I'd received anonymously. Thomas's wife found out. He filed for divorce. Mira was called into HR, and though she wasn't officially fired, her reputation was scorched. Clients didn't want her on their projects. Within a month, she had left the firm entirely. As for me, I cut all contact. There were angry texts, voicemails, even a few late-night knocks on my door. I ignored them all. With Sabrina, things unfolded naturally. It wasn't about rushing into romance. It was about having someone honest beside me. She had been a witness, yes, but she also became something more, a reminder that integrity still existed. The consequences didn't stop with Myra's career. Her parents, humiliated, withdrew financial support she'd always relied on. She moved into a small apartment, a far cry from the lifestyle she had paraded before. Friends she once bragged to kept their distance, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. The irony was brutal. Mira had preached that cheating was just life, something to be accepted. But in practice, it destroyed her. The people she thought would never leave her turned their backs the moment the truth was undeniable. She had gambled everything on the belief that loyalty was an illusion. She ended up with nothing. For me, the dinner wasn't just a victory. It was closure. I hadn't shouted, hadn't broken down, hadn't let her twist the story. I had walked in with the truth, delivered it clean, and left her to face the wreckage she'd created. There was no satisfaction in her downfall, not really. Just a sense of balance restored. Sometimes betrayal feels like the end of the world. But standing in that dining room, watching Myra's carefully constructed image collapse in front of her parents, I realized something else. Betrayal can also be a beginning. Not of revenge, not of bitterness, but of freedom.